Welcome to another Stompy 51 miniature adventure that this time takes you to a place in the future, kind of stuck in the past, where the Neo-Soviet Empire didn't collapse in 1991, but continues to play miniature agnostic games deep into the future. Because Soviet-inspired science fiction is a thing, you know, with some fantastic ideas and an aesthetic of its very own. With my favourite miniature figurine sculptor, Mark Copplestone, diving deep into the genre with his range being sold by North Star Miniatures. When will they make some artillery, people? Anyway, there's no pretense at intellectualism here. I'm much more likely to watch this one day, bit by bit, than I am to read this, which I've had a go at, I think, about 3 times in my life and failed each time. So just to get a baseline, these are the Copplestone castings, Neo-Soviet regulars. But anyway, turning to the subject of this video, which is the final slug of Copplestone castings, Neo-Soviets, we turn to these more militia types, which I guess you can use in stalker type gaming environments. And these guys are, you know, more militia types who are tied in by some pieces of equipment to the Neo-Soviet regulars, but with lots more kind of civilian bits of attire and equipment. And so some have the PPSH. There's another one. Some of the PPSH, but others seem to have other nondescript automatic rifles, which possibly link into the more American style near future miniatures that Copplestone did. But you know, there is a helmet that's pretty similar. I didn't want to spend hours and hours painting these, so I used some of the same color, leather brown, for bits of uniform, but then sprinkled in a few blues and reds just for a bit of civilian attire, and then some green just to use some of the pots of paint that I've got sitting at the bottom of my collection that just don't normally get much use, because I don't really do much moderns, so best to use these paints before they just go off or go hard. Some of these guys, I'm not sure if they look more Canadian than they look Russian, but nothing wrong with that. Now the question is, are the guys in masks always the good guys, or are they always the bad guys? Who knows? An interesting question for current affairs. So these do look a little bit like those little green men that in recent conflicts just magically appeared, having burned their passports and yet being fully trained special services regulars. So in the games that you play, these could either be, you know, local civilians from a village who have tried to upskill themselves to fight the zombie mania, or they could be your elites. You know, there are plenty of special services around the world, special forces who kind of almost enjoy just wearing whatever they want to wear as a kind of mark of pride, but they are in fact highly trained up and sometimes use bits and pieces of enemy equipment if they just fancy it works a bit better. And actually there's the last one who really does look like he's just, you know, he hasn't even got shoes, and he does look like he's part of the zombie apocalypse. And this one is one of the formally attired snipers from the Neo-Sov range. You can see his little belt buckle there with a star of Sovietsky Soyuz there. And him, I sort of derived the paint scheme from the Soviet scouts from World War II with that kind of green amoeba type pattern. And if I had a taller piece of grass, I guess I would have used that. And so I don't really have too many more of these to paint. Although I do keep an eye out for other Soviet miniatures. You see, because I've only been using these figures for Dead Zone, you don't really need that many. And in Xenos Rampant even, you don't need a huge number. And so I don't need many more army chiefs. And I'm not really sure what to do with her. I mean, she'll just be fun to paint, I suppose, as a one-day project. You know, when you try and fit in a hobby project into the time that you have, you know, I might say, look, I've got a couple of hours, let's just sort her out. I might even do that today. That might be a good idea. And I always just like showing him because he's just so much fun. And he is a Copplestone Castings miniature, so he's wholly in keeping style-wise with these, even if he is a bit too futuristic. And he's supposed to be, I think, Bauhaus, but they're kind of a Central and Eastern European type faction, so, you know, I just imagine him being in that kind of Germanic type style that the Tsarist Empire armies used to sort of embrace before World War I. And I found that there are 4 or 5 more kind of powered armoured troopers like him who would totally fit into this and could be the higher end special heavy armoured kind of types in Xenos Rampant. And by Merliton, I meant, of course, Prince August. The only problem is you can get them very affordably for about £3 each at Merliton in Ireland, but then the postage is like about £20. So I'm not really sure it's worth it, but I will find a way. Nature and Stompy 51 always find a way. Now, can we get it on the table without knocking everything else over? And do we have a proper angle for this? So, this is a Russian church, which has taken me about a year to get around to painting. I did a kind of deal with the store owner because I have no interest in assembling terrain. You know, there are different aspects to our hobby, and some bits float my boat, you know. Lots of cool single piece metals, absolutely, with loads of character and not too much detail. That's me. But assembling bits of terrain, not me. And so the store owner loves this kind of stuff. You know, he uses Gorilla Glue, he uses clamps, you know, he enjoys spending half the day between other tasks putting these things together. I don't. So I said, look, I'll buy it. You build it, I'll paint it, and we can leave it in the store. And people can enjoy using it for their Napoleonic games. Not that anyone plays Napoleonics, but if they did, World War II games, obviously. And frankly, why can't we use it for the neo-Soviet future? I mean, I've been to the Russian countryside. Stuff there isn't exactly up to date. Everything seems to be falling apart. So painting it wasn't the usual kind of thing that I do. I didn't want to go wild and spend too much time. So I just used, I didn't want to blow huge amounts of money on, Games Workshop paints for something like this. So I just used Hobbycraft acrylics, the kinds that my kids use, and the brown umber went beautifully. I mixed in a little bit of grey just to make it look a bit more like, you know, aging wood, though I don't think you can really tell. And then I just painted that blue. I didn't go wild with accuracy because it is quite fiddly getting all the little grooves, but you know, who would notice? Who would notice? It's good enough. I found it very hard to get a good kind of, texture's the wrong word, good coverage of this yellow paint for the windows. I thought it would just add a bit of colour because when it was just brown, it was very monotone and it could have been from a black and white movie or an umber and white movie. And so after 5 layers, it didn't look great, the rims of the windows. And so I thought, you know what, I can fix that, because the thing with terrain is it doesn't need to be brilliant, especially if you're depicting somewhere like the Russian countryside. And so I just got, you know, that old trick of just getting some packaging foam, and then I dabbed it in some Rhinox hide and then just dabbed it around to show that, you know, the paint is obviously flecked over the years and there just hasn't been the cash to redo it, because actually who cares, you know, inside is where all the gold and icony icons are, and it's all about faith rather than, you know, conspicuous consumption. And then this, I doubt that actual monasteries are painted in this kind of slightly 18th century military tone, but I do remember walking around the Peter and Paul Fortress in St. Petersburg, and everything seemed to be painted in this kind of style. And so when I saw that there was scope for doing it here, I did so. And I was going to paint the doorframe red, and I thought, you know what, at some point this is going to start looking like a gingerbread house, which is not the point. But, you know, it's already been used in the game, in Dead Zone. And maybe all these boys are going to walk in there and kiss some icons before going out to defend Mother Russia against the Daleks. And in this game of Xenos Rampant, we had a bit of preliminary banter around who were the good guys and the bad guys. And after a bit of frenetic discussion, we came to the Reaganite conclusion that the Neo-Soviets were still the evil empire and the Daleks were the good guys. And in terms of list building, if you know Xenos Rampant, you'll know it's a fantastic miniatures agnostic game which is very fluid and conceptual. And so the Daleks were, one unit was elite infantry and the other two units were heavy infantry, which was pretty straightforward, whereas the Neo-Soviets had one unit of standard light infantry, one unit of light infantry with kind of a few moral courage issues to show it was militia. I've forgotten the name of the special rule. Basically, there's all manner of kind of little rules you can soup things up or down with, and so I souped down that unit. I had a walker, which turned out to be fantastic, and a unit of support infantry, which was basically like this kind of Goliath miniature I got from Anvil Industries, which you'll have seen perhaps in previous videos, which is a kind of mobile cannon, basically, with an engineer who's a kind of fire support officer. And, I mean, the scenario was just kill each other, because, you know, we were just kind of getting to grips with the rules. And as you can see, we just used this kind of Kazakhstan-looking terrain as the Daleks decide to go through the soft underbelly of the Neo-Soviet Union. One cool thing you can do, given that the base size of units is 5, is you can double them up, which gives them quite a lot more kind of staying power. And here you can see the militia running forward, as did the Daleks. No grand strategy here. And in this scene from CSI Kazakhstan, the Daleks go flying past the Kriminalisticheskaya Laboratoria, criminal lab bus, which I don't even know how I got that. I did it in a swap with someone. Where they got it from, who knows? Then we realized that in this rock, paper, scissors world of Xenos Rampant, there was a major downside to the elite infantry, a rule basically aimed at Space Marines, in that the walkers have a rule that halves the armor of anything they shoot at, which is basically a big vehicle or elite infantry. And so my walker started making lots of holes into the elite infantry Daleks. The militia did what they do best and jumped into a trench, which gave them enormous staying power because they were a unit of 10, and it doesn't make you harder to hit, but it makes you a lot harder to wound. And so they just happily dug in and got into a firefight, well, a number of firefights with the oncoming Daleks, who were not in any cover. And so they started to whittle down the Daleks, even though the Daleks were heavy infantry and the militia were light infantry. And also the support weapon I had really brought out how the extreme range rule works. So all these units seem to have what look like pretty short ranges for a sci-fi game. But then you read further and you can shoot, you know, further than the range specified because you can use the extreme range rule. But that doesn't make it harder to hit. It just gives the person you're shooting at a bit of extra armor. But you can still make it count. And so my support unit of that kind of Goliath-looking heavy machine gun started taking out large numbers of these Dalek heavy infantry. And over there in the bottom, you can see the unit of we'll call them Goliaths, that I mentioned, the support unit and the engineer fire support officer behind them, which just kind of kept taking out, at long range, the Daleks up there, and everyone else just kind of gently moved forward, except for the militia, who were happily engaged in an entrenched firefight. And once we started to feel that the Neo-Soviet Union was starting to overwhelm in terms of numbers, I thought let them run out there and actually try and finish off those last few Daleks on the left and right-hand flanks. And I even pressed the slightly cautious militia into trying to overrun the Daleks on the right-hand flank in some hand-to-hand action. But tactically, that was just unwise, because the light infantry, predictably enough, just didn't have the kind of heft to overcome heavy infantry in close combat and kept having to bounce back whilst getting whittled down each time. But ultimately, what really started to count was the role of this Mantic Strider, aka a vehicle walker, which just jumped over the buildings, or rather whatever those storage unit things are, those Games Workshop storage units, and just started taking out Daleks one by one, at which point my opponent fled to wherever the Daleks come from.
One. Yeah. And I've got 4 mana.
Leaving me to ponder what further sources there are for more Neo-Soviet MacGuffin stuff, and my thoughts turn to Red Nebula, who is quite prodigious with some interesting stuff. And though I suspect these are some kind of throwback to an 80s kids cartoon show, I don't know all of them, which shows my age, but the design ethos of these struck me as potentially kind of Neo-Soviet, because I remember working for this one Russian guy, and he was always very proud to tell me this story whereby during the space race, the Americans spent $10,000 in 1960s currency, whatever, 1970s currency, to find a way of getting a ballpoint pen to work in an environment with zero gravity, whereas he said Russians just take pencil, and they took this kind of simple approach, keep it simple, and these looked pretty simple to me. And if I paint them in that kind of T-34, Red Army green color, and then just put some Soviet writing all over them about, Za Rodinu and love for the motherland and all that, then these could potentially be some kind of elite infantry or droids or something to kind of boost up my Copplestone Neo-Soviet force. But that is one for another day, when perhaps we achieve socialism. In any event, keep well, keep safe. Please do like, comment and subscribe, because it helps people see my little channel and modest efforts and gives me a bit of a boost to keep going. See you next time.